And I wanted to do this YouTube series to break down my very specific steps about different craft elements that will help you write your memoir. And this is really me sharing things that help me along the way, questions that I ask myself that help me, and things that really made the process a lot more enlightening and a lot more life-giving. This video is all about defining the scope and theme of your memoir. And the reason that defining the scope and theme of your memoir is so important because memoir is different than other genres. Memoir is considered creative nonfiction. You have biography, you have autobiography, and the distinction is that with biography and autobiography, you're typically using more factual evidence to write about a larger, if not the totality of someone's life. For example, the autobiography of Malcolm X is an autobiography about Malcolm X's entire life from birth until when the book was written / when Malcolm X was assassinated. Memoirs are different because you are specifically writing about a certain chapter or period or era of your life, or you're writing about your life under the guise of a particular theme or question. And that is what makes memoir way more subjective and kind of special in my opinion, because I think so much of academia or the colonial narrative is telling us, like, you need to write about things in a super factual way. You need to get across the totality.
You use a lot of memory from ancestors somehow in the book. Do you not? I mean, do you believe in that? Do you believe that ancestors that you have not known can be still coming through us, working through us, and we retain some memory
I do now.
of them? You do now?
I do now. My whole education, was to make sure I didn't believe things like that. And I dismissed all sorts of things that were indigenous in my family, superstition and, the discredited information, the discredited way of knowing that discredited people always have. But when I began to write, that was the place where I had to go. That's where the information was. That's where the images were. That's where the language, the color came in these tales, folk tales, attitudes, the normal, easy acceptance of signs. And then things began to happen that were really quite startling.
And what I love about the memoir genre over the past 10, 15, 20 years is that it shifted away from you needing to have a total or a full platform. And yes, the internet and social media is pushing people to feel like they need to have thousands of followers in order to even get a book deal. But what I love now is that I think the average reader is accepting that more kinds of stories need to be out there, and that the average person could have something to say in a memoir that could be extraordinary or life-giving or life-changing. And so what I think is really special about memoir is that it forces the writer to ask themselves, what in my life do I kind of see as a thread? What topics or ideas show up often? What do I think about a lot? And how does that provide a certain kind of shape or exploration of the kind of person I am? And the way that I thought about scope when I first started writing my book is that I knew I wanted to write a book about being Black and Jamaican American and queer and an organizer and a traveler. I knew I wanted to embody all of these different identities in the book. And so that gave me a kind of scope of the different kind of experiences that I wanted to explore, the kind of things earlier on in my life that I think now that I'm older kind of allude to things that I would have felt or explored or questioned later on. And so understanding the scope is really important because it lets you kind of know what set of events you're going to be getting into, what you're going to be exploring. And it's important when you're writing memoir to set boundaries about things that you do want to write about and things that you don't write about, because you don't need to write about everything. Writing about everything can be extremely painful. And it's just a lot when you don't need to be doing all of that. And then let's get into theme. Theme is another thing that helps you kind of define the scope or even dive deeper into it. And theme is typically a lesson or a universal truth or a philosophical notion that your story is trying to explore. And so, for example, let's just use Matilda as an example. Matilda is a very classic children's book and a movie. The themes in Matilda are community, individual truth, finding the courage to stand up for what you believe in at any age. Especially that last theme is so significant in Matilda because Matilda is young, but she's inspiring the people around her, like her teacher. What's her teacher's name? Mrs. Honey, to stand up for herself as well. We're looking at Taken. Taken as a story, the theme in that is basically family matters and you need to find family at any cost. I don't know where I'm going with this one. What philosophical truths are you navigating? If there are moments of duress in your narrative, what are the things that your character or other characters tell the main character that help them navigate what problems are happening in the story. And I can say for my book, I knew some of the themes I wanted to explore were queer displacement. So this idea that when you come out and you might not be accepted by your family or your community, a lot of queer people typically go out into the world to find their chosen family. And I looked at this as kind of like a process of feeling displaced. I definitely wanted to unpack different notions of masculinity and look at Black masculinity and Caribbean masculinity and kind of analyze masculinity through a similar lens to radical feminists. I knew I wanted to talk about the emotional realities of activism and organizing. I knew I wanted to find media moments and cultural events that could explain the gender dynamics of my family and the world that I lived in. And so these are all kind of themes that help me kind of look at like my younger years, the years when I was in school, and then after school to kind of figure out like what I want to write about. And to give one example, like I knew when I wanted to write about masculinity, I knew that it was necessary to write about being bullied growing up and the different things that different men in my family would say to kind of try and socialize me in a particular kind of masculinity. And so knowing that I wanted to write about that helped me, one, figure out how I wanted to write about my personal life, and then it helped me figure out what research am I doing into Jamaica's history, what books am I reading. But we'll talk more about research and how theme can help with a number of things. If you're writing a personal narrative, knowing your theme can help you figure out what people or characters in your life to include. I knew that if I wanted to write about masculinity, I both wanted to write about men that had affected me negatively and also men, friendships in my life that had affected me positively. And I kind of wanted to have an arc that went from a confusion around whether or not I wanted to follow these rules about being a boy or a man to finding more intimate and emotional truths with the men in my lives, whether real or imagined. So it helps you figure out what people you want to include. It helps you figure out what scenes under that same guise. I knew with writing about masculinity, a big scene that I wanted to include was a chapter I wanted to really write about, and I actually didn't include it in the final draft, was I wanted to write about these weird experiences that I had in middle school where other boys in my grade would try to teach me how to hit on girls, but in this really messed up way that was kind of like showing off to the girl and to other guys. And so I saw very clearly at this point in my life the kind of lessons that people were trying to teach me about masculinity, but I definitely found other ways to kind of write about it in the book. And then another really important reason that knowing theme can help you in writing is that it helps you get a clear arc to your story. So obviously, if you're writing a story where there's only one or two themes, the arc is kind of easier to look at. But when you're looking at numerous themes, it's important to build moments from the beginning, middle, and end where these different themes kind of coalesce or entangle or come together. And the way that I'm viewing this is that in a lot of the younger years in my book, I talk about loneliness and not totally knowing how to relate to masculinity and how people wanted to teach me about masculinity. And then later on in the book, I'm definitely navigating more close friendships with men. There is an entire chapter of my book where it's autofiction, which is a genre where you combine real life elements with fictional elements. And I imagine a friend that I've had who's basically helped me understand what it means to open up to other men and to find power in that and value in that and not to run away from it. Knowing your arc can help you in so many ways. I mean, if you're writing a book about your love life and coming into yourself and learning to let go of needing to be in a relationship in order to love yourself, your arc can be at the beginning, maybe you're in a relationship. In the middle, the breakup could happen. And by the end, you end up alone. And so understanding that your theme is about learning to love yourself through the pitfalls of traditional romance, that is an arc that you can give yourself, and you can use your life moments and different things that have happened to you to express the way that you've changed. This is something that I want to dive into more in other videos, but it also gives you an idea of what you need to research. So I knew for my book, I wanted to write a lot about Jamaican history. So I started reading a lot of texts by Michael Manley, who was one of the first prime ministers. I started watching documentaries about how Jamaica gained independence, about how it developed economically after independence, how gangs developed as a way to help people in more poor communities, and it was a way of navigating and showing culture. I learned about how gender was created. I learned about the different artists throughout Jamaica's history that kind of exhibited different cultural ideas that were present in Jamaica at the time, like Bob Marley. I did a lot of reading about masculinity. I read a lot of bell hooks. There's a really great book by Raywin Cowell called Masculinities, I believe. And she talks about how there are different masculinities that live and operate in the same environment. And so I use that in my book to talk about what I considered outlaw and revolutionary masculinity. And so knowing where you're going to research also helps you find more information to kind of get more inspired by what you're writing. So we've talked about defining the scope. We've talked about why having themes is important. I think another really big thing about knowing the scope and the theme of your memoir that really will help you is creating a kind of timeline. I think deciding what you're going to put in your book can be really, really confusing and overwhelming. And I knew that once I did my research and I found these different characters and scenes and moments that I wanted to write about, I started making a timeline. So I literally remember it was about 2 years ago. I was co-working with my friend and we went to a like library room and I wrote out this timeline on the board and I broke down parts of my life that were in the timeline, parts of my family's life, parts of Jamaica's history, political events, and knowing that really helps you figure out what the narrative flow and what the pacing of your book is going to be, which is also really important.